that's not right. Let's try that again. Okay. Welcome to 10 Minute Monday. My name is Amy Fletcher and I am the youth pastor at Vineyard Community Church. We are in the second week of our series of Threshold. That's why we have a door here. Threshold is literally just the little piece of wood or the change between one room to another. It is part of your doorway. You go in and out of them all day long. And we are talking about the changes that God leads us through in our lives. And we're looking at different stories in the Bible to see how we can connect with God leading us through those changes, what we learn about God and what we learn about ourselves through the changes of thresholds. Let's just get right down to it. We are in Genesis 22 today. We are learning about Abraham and Isaac. And Genesis 22 says, sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." This is a big risk for Abraham, trusting God with his one and only son. It's also the promised son. It's a huge risk. But it's not the first big risk that God has asked of Abraham. In Genesis 12, God asked Abram to leave his family and settle on a specific piece of land. Abraham's people generally stayed together and traveled together. So leaving his family and everything that he knew was a big risk for Abram. In Genesis 15, God promises Abraham a child. And Sarah and him are getting on in age, and waiting for this child as they get older and older is a big risk for Abraham. See, sometimes God asks us to take big risks to follow his lead. Do you feel like God is asking you to take a big risk to follow him? It might be scary to take a big risk, or you might wonder what will happen if things don't go exactly according to plan. You might worry that you're not following God's lead perfectly. So let's see how this worked out for Abram. In Genesis 12, after Abram follows God's lead to leave his family and settle in a piece of land, it quickly goes wrong. There's famine that hits the land, and he's like, we're out of here. So he and Sarai go to Egypt, and they pretend to be brother and sister, and this doesn't work out quite so well. There's a lot of people that get upset, and there's a lot of confusion. But here's the deal. They get kicked out of Egypt, and they still have the promise of the land of Canaan. They still have God's blessing on that land. In Genesis 16, after God promises Sarai and Abram a child, they decide to give Sarai's servant Hagar to Abram as a wife so that she can conceive a child for their family. We talked about Hagar last week, so if you didn't get to see that, check the link below in the description box, and it'll tell you all about her story and how God met her there. See, but that's not the child, that's not the plan that God had. But God still blessed Abraham and Sarah with a child. They got pregnant and they had Isaac. See, the great thing to know when you're taking big risks for God is that even when we don't get it right, even when we make mistakes, God doesn't withhold his love. And he doesn't withhold his promises either. We can cling to those as we take big risks for God. So God tests Abraham and asking him to sacrifice his one and only son, Isaac, on a mountain in Moriah. And that's where we are when we pick up verse 3. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." I love these verses because Abraham isn't dilly-dallying. He gets up the next morning. He's like, okay, what do we need? He packs up and he grabs his servants and he heads out. I wonder what was on his mind this whole time. It was a 3-day journey. So I wonder what he was thinking about. I mean, was Isaac chatty on their road? Isaac is an older teen, possibly a young man at this time. Abraham is in his 120s range. So he's kind of an old man. Are they chit-chatting along the way, or is it kind of a silent ride? And we don't really know, but I think that there's a little bit of a hint in verse 5. See, while Abraham is committed to sacrificing Isaac, because that's where the Lord has asked him to go, he believes that both of them will return. He tells the servants, "We will go up to the mountain and worship, and we will return." So while Abraham is following God's lead to sacrifice Isaac, as the Lord has asked, he truly believes that they will both return. Abraham trusts God. In verse 6, we start here. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac, laid him on top of the altar, on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. The repetition of Abraham, Abraham was to get his attention. It was an indicator of urgency. It's saying, "Hey, look at me, Abraham, Abraham, stop what you're doing." And I can just imagine Abraham's sigh of relief as he says, "Here I am. Here I am." Abraham is trusting God with the most precious thing in his life, knowing that God could spare his son or bring him back to life. And the angel of the Lord continues. He says, "Do not lay a hand on that boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." Abraham didn't know how God would provide, just that he would. We see this in his conversation with his servants and Isaac. We will return. God will provide the lamb. Abraham is confident that God will provide. And we can be confident that God will provide where he leads us. If he's asking us to take a big risk, we can be confident that he won't withhold his love or his promises if we make a mistake. We can be confident that he will provide where he leads us. And we can fully trust God's lead, knowing that he will not lead us into something without being by our side. We can trust God to lead us well. Thank you for joining us for this 10-Minute Monday. Hopefully, we'll see you next week. Bye.